In 1973, Clint Eastwood opened a letter at his Malpaso office. It came from John Wayne, the biggest cowboy who ever lived, writing to him by name. Wayne had just watched Eastwood's newest Western, and he was angry enough to put it in writing. Eastwood read it, folded it away, and never answered. For almost 20 years, no one knew it existed. For most of the 20th century, only one man truly owned the American Western, and his name was John Wayne.
He was imposing enough that even if you were having dinner with him, or you were in a circumstance which was totally at ease, you never forgot that you were with an icon.
When audiences pictured a cowboy, they pictured him. The wide shoulders, the slow rolling walk, the voice that sounded like it had been carved out of dry desert air. He had spent 40 years building that image, one film at a time, and by the early 1970s, it belonged to him so completely that the genre and the man had become the same thing in the public mind. Then, a younger man rode in from a completely different direction. Clint Eastwood came back from Italy with a poncho, a thin cigar, and a character who barely spoke, who shot first, and who cared nothing for the rules Wayne had spent a lifetime defending. Audiences loved him. Critics began calling him the future of the Western.
Eastwood didn't smoke, but he did favor those little dark, smelly cigars. That and the squint in the Spanish sun and his extraordinary face created a kind of icon.
And John Wayne watched it happen from the throne he had no intention of giving up. What grew between the two men was never a screaming feud with thrown punches or insults traded in the press. It was quieter than that, and in some ways, colder. It was a war over a single question, one that ran underneath every frame both men ever shot. The question was what the Western was supposed to mean, what a hero was supposed to be, and whether the America that John Wayne had spent his life selling on screen had ever really existed at all. The letter Eastwood folded away that day in 1973 was simply the moment the war finally went down on paper. To understand why that letter cut so deep, you have to understand what John Wayne believed he was protecting. He had not been born a cowboy or a hero. He came into the world as Marion Robert Morrison in Winterset, Iowa in May of 1907, a tall and quiet boy who picked up the nickname Duke from the family dog that followed him everywhere. Hollywood found him hauling furniture and playing tiny parts until John Ford handed him the role of the Ringo Kid in Stagecoach in 1939. And from that moment forward, Marion Morrison slowly began to disappear.
But it was Ford, I guess, who
gave my career a boost.
Yeah.
In his place stood a character so convincing that an entire country mistook it for a real man. Everything about that character was deliberate. Wayne studied the silent cowboy stars who came before him and decided they were too clean and too perfect to believe. So he built a rougher man, one with a temper and a hard sense of right and wrong that he would die before breaking. By the 1950s, he was the most bankable star in the world, and he used that power to guard the Western the way a sheriff guards a town.
So I fit the background of Westerns better. Do today, and they expected you to be rugged enough to do a little of this stuff, so I fit that category.
When the film High Noon arrived in 1952 and showed a frightened lawman begging cowardly townspeople for help, Wayne called it un-American and wanted nothing to do with it. When Sam Peckinpah drowned the screen in slow-motion blood with The Wild Bunch in 1969, Wayne saw an insult to everything the genre stood for. He did not merely star in Westerns. He had appointed himself the keeper of their meaning. That belief ran straight through his politics. Wayne helped found the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals in 1944 and served as its president during the years Hollywood was hunting communists. And he never softened his stance for anyone.
We are Americans. Anybody that wanted to join us, it was fine. We gave no names out to anybody at any time, ever.
In a now infamous magazine interview in 1971, he laid out a worldview so rigid and so racially charged that it still stuns the people who read it today. He spoke about patriotism the way other men spoke about religion. Yet underneath all the flag waving sat a wound he never managed to heal. When America went to war in 1941, the man who would come to embody the American fighting soldier on screen never put on a real uniform.
Early 1950s Hollywood, every single crew member had just gotten back from World War II. And John Wayne got himself a lot of deferments.
A studio deferment and a growing family kept him home while younger actors shipped overseas. And the friends who knew him best said he spent the rest of his life trying to prove, film after film, that he was the warrior he had only ever played. By the time Clint Eastwood arrived, Wayne was not just a movie star defending his territory. He was an aging man defending the only version of himself he could stand to be. Clint Eastwood came from the opposite end of nearly everything. Born in San Francisco in May of 1930, he drifted through the last years of the Depression and a long string of odd jobs before he stumbled into television, where he spent 6 years as Rowdy Yates on the Cattle Drive series Rawhide. The show made him familiar in living rooms across the country, but it very nearly bored him out of the business. He grew tired of playing the clean and obedient young cowboy in the white hat, the exact kind of decent hero Wayne had spent decades perfecting, and he started hunting for something with an edge to it.
Your character was, I think, the first movie character, really, who didn't wait for the other guy to draw his gun.
Yeah, well, it doesn't make sense. Why would you wait for somebody to draw their gun? American Westerns, I never could understand that.
That something arrived from the unlikeliest place imaginable, an Italian director almost no one in America had heard of. A man named Sergio Leone offered Eastwood the lead in a cheap Western, shooting in the dust of southern Spain.
When I was approached to do Fistful of Dollars, there was no such thing as a spaghetti Western. There were a few Westerns that had been made by Italian companies. Few small ones, but they were never dubbed that particular thing. That came later on.
His own agents told him it was a career mistake and warned him to stay home. Eastwood ignored them, packed a poncho he picked out himself, and flew to Europe to play a drifter with no name, no past, and barely any dialogue, all for a fee of around $15,000. In Leone's earliest version of the script, the character had even been named Ringo, a quiet nod to the role that first made Wayne a star, until Leone stripped the name away entirely. He wanted a man with no name, no history, and nothing but the moment in front of him. The result? A Fistful of Dollars. Exploded across Europe in 1964, and by the time the full trilogy reached American screens in 1967, Clint Eastwood had become a phenomenon.
We all associate with kinetic genre action-making cinema was pretty much born the day Fistful of Dollars was born.
He had turned himself into a Western icon without making a single Western inside Hollywood, and the old guard noticed exactly what he had done. They did not like the look of it. To men like Wayne, these Italian-made pictures were cheap, ugly, and amoral, packed with squinting killers who gunned men down for a fistful of coins and felt nothing afterward. The American press mocked them with a nickname meant to wound, calling them spaghetti westerns. Eastwood took the insult and built an empire on top of it. He came home, founded his own production company, and in 1971 became Dirty Harry, trading the open desert for the dirty city while keeping the same cold and watchful man at the center of the frame.
So I think that Clint Eastwood created something that was unlike anything else.
The hero Wayne had spent 40 years carefully shaping was being shoved aside by something harder, and the man doing the shoving had learned his entire trade thousands of miles from Hollywood. For one brief window, the two men might have ended up on the same side of the camera. They had crossed paths in town, and Wayne, in a rare friendly moment, once told the younger actor that the two of them ought to make a movie together someday. It was the kind of offhand line that could have rewritten both their careers. In 1969, Eastwood was even offered a part in True Grit, the film that would finally win Wayne the only Academy Award of his life.
I'm not going to tell you. The winner is John Wayne in True Grit.
But he turned it down, saying the role was too small and his schedule too full. The two great icons of the American Western kept missing one another, partly by accident and partly on purpose. Then came the script that nearly forced them together for real. A writer named Larry Cohen had built a story called The Hostiles around two perfect opposites: a young gambler who wins half of an aging rancher's land in a single card game, and the proud old rancher who must then defend that land beside the very man who just beat him. It read as if it had been written for them, because it had. The gambler was Eastwood, the rancher was Wayne. In November of 1970, a copy of that script landed at Wayne's production company, Batjack. Eastwood read his own copy, liked what he saw, and sent it on with a note saying it looked promising. He was ready to share the screen with the man whose throne he was accused of stealing. Wayne's answer came back short and final: no thanks. 2 words, and the most anticipated Western team-up that never happened was dead on arrival. Larry Cohen was crushed. He had dreamed his whole life of writing a picture for John Wayne, and instead, he watched the Duke pass it up to make a couple of forgettable Westerns while the chance to pair him with Eastwood drained away forever. Years later, a watered-down version of his story limped onto television as a small TV movie, with neither legend anywhere near it. Why Wayne said no has been argued over ever since. Part of it may have been plain ego, an unwillingness to share the saddle with the young man being called his replacement. Part of it ran far deeper. Wayne had watched what Eastwood represented, and he wanted no part of lending his name and his legacy to it. The refusal was the first clear sign that the older man no longer saw Eastwood as a possible partner, but as a genuine threat. And that threat was about to make the film that turned Wayne's quiet wariness into open anger. In 1973, Clint Eastwood directed his first Western, and he made it as a direct answer to everything the genre had ever been. High Plains Drifter dropped audiences into the sun-bleached town of Lago, perched on the edge of a shimmering lake, where a stranger with no name rides in out of the heat haze. Within the first few minutes of screen time, he kills 3 men and drags a woman into a barn. He does not ride in to rescue this town, he rides in to punish it. He learns that the people of Lago once stood by and watched their own marshal whipped to death in the dirt, doing nothing. And so he turns their cowardice into their sentence, forcing them to paint every building blood red, renaming the place Hell on the welcome sign, and leaving it burning behind him as he disappears. Eastwood shot the whole thing in barely 6 weeks on the shores of Mono Lake in California, building an entire fake town from raw lumber so that he could burn it down on camera.
Are you using that one? Yeah. I think if you go through and you drag the thing around and they come through this way, kind of go with this action. You can be down on the ground, you can probably miss me on the head.
The film was strange, brutal, and impossible to forget, and audiences poured in, turning it into one of the most successful Westerns of the decade. To Eastwood, it was a fable, a ghost story wearing the costume of a Western, never meant to be a history lesson about brave pioneers planting crops. John Wayne saw something else entirely. He sat through the film, and what he watched offended him down to the foundation of who he believed he was. This was not the West he had spent his life portraying. He had built his entire career on decent men taming hard country and honest families raising something out of nothing, and he saw none of that here. What he saw instead was cruelty, cowardice, and a nameless drifter at the center who felt nothing at all. So Wayne did something he rarely did for anyone. He sat down and wrote Clint Eastwood a letter. The exact words on that page have never been published, and all that survives today is Eastwood's own memory of them, but the message was unmistakable. Wayne told him the film was simply wrong. As Eastwood would later recall it, Wayne wrote that this was not what the West had been about, and that these were not the people who had truly settled and built the country. In Wayne's eyes, Eastwood had taken the genre he loved most and spat on the men who lived it. Eastwood read the letter and understood in an instant that the gap between them could never be closed. As he put it years afterward, the two of them belonged to 2 different generations, and Wayne was never going to understand what he had been trying to do. He had not made a movie about pioneers. He had made a movie about guilt and vengeance, and he had used the familiar clothes of the Western to do it. There was nothing to argue and nothing left to explain, so Eastwood folded the letter away and never wrote back. The most powerful man in the history of the Western had reached out personally to the man taking his place, and the man taking his place let the silence answer for him. It would be easy to call what Eastwood felt hatred, and for 50 years, that is exactly how the story has been told. The truth was more tangled than that, and far more interesting. Eastwood never once denied that Wayne, at his best, was magnificent. He admired the Duke in Red River, where Wayne played a hard and deeply flawed cattle baron, willing to let the audience hate him. He praised Wayne's work in The Searchers as brave, pointing out that Wayne was not afraid to play a man eaten alive by racism and rage, and that you could read the darkness right there in his eyes without him ever once explaining it. Eastwood respected the actor completely. What he could never respect was the wall the actor had built around what a Western was allowed to be. The two finally stood in the same room near the very end of Wayne's life. In 1976, Wayne made his last film, The Shootist, the story of an aging gunfighter facing his final days, directed by Don Siegel, the same man who had mentored Eastwood and directed him in Dirty Harry.
Are you gonna play cowboy by any chance, or a man of the West?
No, this one's called the shootist.
The shootist? So you're gonna play a...
Yeah, I'm gonna play a gunfighter. Of course, the author says that they didn't call them gunfighters in those days, they called them shooters.
Eastwood came to the set to pay a visit, and the cameras caught the two of them standing together, the old king and the new one, smiling for a single moment that hid everything churning underneath. Eastwood would later tell a story from around that period that captured the entire divide in one line. On a Western set, a director once suggested that a scene be shot the way Eastwood might have done it, with a man cut down from behind. Wayne reportedly erupted. He did not care how the kid would have filmed it, he snapped, because John Wayne did not shoot men in the back.
I don't shoot anyone in the back. And Don made a terrible error. He said Clint Eastwood would have shot him in the back. And he said Wayne turned blue. You see? And he said, I don't care what that kid would have done, I don't shoot him in the back.
That single sentence held the whole argument between them. To Wayne, a real hero faced his enemy head-on and gave him a fighting chance. To Eastwood, the men of the actual West rarely bothered with such manners, and pretending otherwise was a comfortable lie. Even Wayne, in a guarded moment, admitted the younger man had something in him, allowing only that he figured Eastwood had a chance. Coming from the Duke, those words landed as half a blessing and half an insult, all in the same breath. John Wayne was already dying as he made The Shootist, and he knew it better than anyone on that set. Cancer had taken one of his lungs back in the 1960s, and by the late 1970s, it had returned and spread through his body. He spent his final months as the most honored movie star in America, with Congress voting to strike a gold medal bearing his name, while the country treated his decline like the slow passing of a founding father. On the 11th of June, 1979, John Wayne died of cancer at the age of 72, and an entire idea of America seemed to fall quiet alongside him.
It was front-page news all over the world today. John Wayne was dead. In Tokyo, the headline read, Mr. America passes on.
There was no deathbed reconciliation between the two men. No late phone call, no tearful goodbye whispered in a hospital room. The stories that claim otherwise were invented later by people who wanted a tidier ending than the one that actually happened. The plain truth is that Wayne died still believing Eastwood had helped cheapen the thing he loved most in the world, and Eastwood let the old man go without ever once answering the letter from 6 years before. The long Cold War between them ended the only way it ever could, with one side simply running out of time. But the argument they had been having was nowhere near finished. Eastwood would settle it himself, in his own way and on his own terms, and it would take him another 13 years to do it. For nearly 2 decades, almost no one alive knew that letter existed. Eastwood had folded it away and kept the whole exchange locked inside himself, and the world went on believing the two cowboys had simply belonged to different eras and left it at that. Then, in 1992, Clint Eastwood released the film that would finally explain everything he had been trying to say since High Plains Drifter. And while promoting it, he chose, at long last, to speak about John Wayne's letter out loud for the first time. The film was Unforgiven.
But what I liked about the story is that the characters all had a point of view. And even though he was the villain in the piece, he had a point of view, he thought he was right.
In it, Eastwood plays William Money, a retired killer so worn down by age and guilt that he can barely climb onto his own horse. There is no glory in his violence, and no honor buried in his past, only nightmares and the half-remembered faces of people he killed for money. Money is the anti-Wayne, the gunfighter myth turned completely inside out and forced to stare at what it really cost. Eastwood dedicated the picture to Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, the two directors who had shaped him most, and one of its most haunting scenes, with Money lying sick in the rain, certain he is about to die, was drawn directly from Wayne's own final performance in The Shootist. Eastwood was not erasing John Wayne from the genre, he was answering him. Unforgiven won the Academy Award for Best Picture and earned Eastwood the very first directing Oscar of his career.
And the Oscar for the Best Picture of 1992 goes to Clint Eastwood.
It became, in the eyes of critics and film historians alike, the picture that finally buried the old heroic Western myth, the exact myth that Wayne had spent his whole life and his angry letter defending. And here lies the bitter truth hiding inside Eastwood's greatest triumph. John Wayne had been right all along. Eastwood really had set out to dismantle the clean and heroic West, to show it as something darker and far more honest. And now he had done it so completely that the genre would never look innocent again. The old man's deepest fear had come true, delivered by the very hand he had once invited to make a movie with him. So why has this story always been told as pure hatred? Because something close to it was real, even if that single word is too simple to hold the whole truth. Clint Eastwood did not hate John Wayne the man. He admired the actor and studied his finest work like a student. What he could never abide was what Wayne stood for. A vision of America so spotless and so certain that it left no room for anything true. Wayne sold a country of flawless heroes and righteous gunfire, of men who never shot anyone in the back and never doubted for a second that they were on the right side. Eastwood spent his entire career insisting that the real West and the real country behind it had been built by harder and more broken people than that. The two of them were never really fighting over movies. They were fighting over which America would get to be remembered. Wayne wanted the legend preserved exactly as he had built it. Eastwood wanted the audience to see the cost hiding behind that legend. And the strangest irony of all is that Eastwood needed John Wayne to push against, because you cannot tear down a myth that nobody believes in. And no one in the history of film ever made that myth more beautiful than the Duke. In the end, the letter said everything. One man wrote to defend a dream he had given his life to. The other refused to answer, then spent the next 20 years proving, frame by careful frame, that the dream had never been the whole story. Two cowboys, two Americas, and a silence stretched between them that turned out to be the loudest thing either man ever said.